Early 20th century USA. A locomotive carrying the acts of a traveling circus blows through Louisiana's Pearl River one dark, dreary night. The boxcar is filled with props and supplies, but nothing more important than the VIPs on board, the circus's main act, an assortment of exotic animals from all corners of the world. Zebras, lions, tigers, gazelles, creatures that the eyes of the Western world once thought the stuff of myth. Goodness knows how much money they were making, and this was the golden age of mobile attractions, freak shows, and the like. But before this act could make its next stop, something unexpected happened. Sometime during the train's journey, it derailed, sending the contents of the locomotive to spill out into the murky Louisiana swampland, those contents being animals. It was a complete disaster. Not only had the circus effectively been destroyed in transit, but now the very headline people came to see the most was now scattered in unfamiliar territory, a completely foreign environment. These beasts were scattered, frantic, looking to get as far away from the screeching metal as they could. But little did they know that what awaited them in the bayou wouldn't be much better. Over time, the out-of-place creatures sadly succumbed to the wilderness in different ways. The fauna were eaten by alligators, the lack of food starved the predators, a general lack of adaptation put an end to everything else in between. It all seemed lost, except for one of the circus acts, the chimpanzees. While the bones of panthers and giraffes littered the dark, swampy waters, the human-like primates didn't just survive, but thrived. They thrived so well, in fact, that the ones who survived effectively settled near Pearl River, escaping human custody and even evolving. And even though these freed chimps found themselves a new home, the results of genetic mingling with local wildlife brought about something monstrous. Because according to over 60 years of sightings, visitors brave enough to explore the damp bayous of Louisiana claim to have seen these results. And apparently, they aren't pretty. In our inaugural feature, the elusive Florida skunk ape took center stage, proving to be a member of the cryptid community that separates itself from the common Bigfoot. It was slightly shorter, darker, and more unique in its qualities. And most important of all, emitting a rank smell, compared to that of old garbage. Just like the skunk ape, another creature, just a little further west, stalks its own lonely swamp. Known most popularly as the Honey Island Swamp Monster, on the outside, based on witness accounts, it doesn't look all that much different from the regular Sasquatch. It's tall, covered in fur, and it's bipedal, walking like you or I would. The cryptid is also noted for its unpleasant smell, just like its cousin in Florida. But even more unique are the creature's one-of-a-kind webbed toes, a clear indicator that it's adapted to its environment. Now, the story about the circus train crashing may just be an unfounded legend, but it's really only one way of explaining where this beast may have come from. If you delve a little deeper into that story, the common assumption is that the escaped chimpanzees actually crossbred with local alligators, in turn producing the swamp monster, which we obviously know is impossible. However, if you listen to some indigenous tribes like the Chitimacha, they'll tell you of cultural figures with similar appearances from legends passed down. They might speak of an imposing monster called wolfwalkers, a terrifying creature that resides in the woods with a thirst for human flesh. More traditional Cajun folklore may point you to the infamous Lugaru, a kind of werewolf-style entity, a person who can transform into an animal or some other ungodly being. As far as the Honey Island Swamp Monster is concerned, we can comfortably say that its origins remain unknown. But if we consider the turn-of-the-century train crash to be where it came from, it didn't receive any sort of notoriety until 1963. There's a main character attached to this story, a man by the name of Harlan Ford, whose slight obsession with the monster helped propel it to what it is today. But that obsession didn't spawn out of nowhere. Not only had he a close encounter with the cryptid, but for all we know, he was the first to ever do so. Ford was a retired air traffic controller and pilot with an affinity for the outdoors, often scouting, hunting, or enjoying the sights. This interest brought him to the Honey Island swamp area of Louisiana, a place where he and a good friend named Billy Mills thought would be rife with game. Before they put boots on the ground, though, Harlan used a twin-engine plane to scope out the best hunting spots for him and Billy, as well as decent places to set up camp. Once that was over, Harlan and Billy grabbed their guns, gear, and entered the unpredictable swamp. At some point, the pair had decided to set up camp in one of the previous areas that Harlan had scouted, and both men spent some time hauling in supplies to that spot. That's when they saw it. Just a little further into the distance, a rustling was heard. The hunters looked on to see what looked like a large animal feasting on the corpse of another. In a way, it was, but the predator wasn't anything they could have imagined. It was alarmingly large, covered in fur, and stood on all fours. With their guns in hand, the frightened hunters raised their weapons and aimed them towards the creature. But, as if watching them the whole time, the beast stopped what it was doing, stood up on its hind legs, and glared at the two men. Based on Harlan Ford's account, the monster's stature grew even more imposing, standing at an intimidating 7 feet tall, looking right back at them with yellow, glowing eyes. It was petrifying, with Ford recounting, quote, "It was ugly and sinister, and looking like something out of a horror movie." The creature also gave off an unforgettable stench before taking off. Although the encounter was rather quick, its impact left quite a mark on Harlan Ford that day in 1963, culminating into something comparable to a life's mission in a sense. He was already a wildlife photographer, likely yearning to set his eyes on something different. Because of this encounter, Ford dedicated the next decade of his life to finding the Honey Island swamp monster. When he could, Ford spent his time around Honey Island, Pearl River, and the general Louisiana swampland in the slight hope he could even catch a glimpse of this monster yet again. Not much in the name of evidence was recovered throughout the rest of the decade, but it wasn't until 1974 when Harlan decided to scope out and find the exact same camping spot he and Billy Mills witnessed the creature more than 10 years ago. It was here where he found something both spectacular and truly disturbing. Working through the brush and low-hanging branches, Harlan Ford found a watering hole near the old campsite. As he crept closer, he noticed signs of a recent scuffle between animals on the ground. Blood had spattered the forest floor, and it was fresh. Even more, a trail of it led just across the watering hole. Harlan had a feeling about this one. Following the blood, he crawled through some more brush, the glistening crimson growing thicker. On the other side, he found where it was coming from. Although he may have missed the cause, he for sure witnessed the effect, and then some. Lying dead was a large, wild boar with none other than its throat pulled out. Whatever killed this thing didn't do so for food, it seems. The grisly scene was astonishing, but surprisingly, not as interesting as another piece of evidence found nearby, because right next to the mutilated boar, Harlan Ford took note of a series of footprints, still freshly pressed onto the moist ground. Harlan couldn't believe it. He may not have seen the swamp monster, but in a sense, he found something even better. He returned to the spot sometime later with plaster, pouring it into the imprint and saving a cast as proof of his find. This is that cast. Incredibly, unlike the average Sasquatch, this print featured a large three-toed foot with nothing other than webbing connecting the three appendages. It was something out of an old pulp sci-fi, something reptilian. And whatever it was, it had a taste for flesh. After years of searching with not much evidence to show for it, Ford had a clear example that something other than an alligator was stalking Louisiana's swampland. He didn't keep it to himself either. He took the cast to both the game warden and LSU's College of Agriculture for a proper examination. Both came up flat in terms of answers. If this was true, that Harlan Ford didn't make this up, then there truly was something unexplained lurking in Honey Island. But putting Harlan aside, he wasn't the only witness reporting sightings of the creature out that way. Through different periods in the late 20th century, others have bore witness to the imposing beast. One of them being a hunter going by Hubert. In 1981, he told a friend about his strange hunting experience in the swamp, where he was perched up in a tree stand. Hubert heard massive footsteps approaching just below him, and when he looked down, a large bipedal creature covered in hair was working its way through the woods. In DeSoto Parish in December of that year, another hunter named Mike Woolley had an even closer encounter with it. While out with his shotgun, Mike witnessed a terrified doe burst into his camp, collapse in exhaustion while foaming at the mouth. A moment later, something had made itself known right behind a tree just ahead of him. Peeking out with glowing red eyes stood a 7 or 8 foot tall beast covered in fur, estimated to weigh about 450 pounds. As Mike Woolley looked closer, he noticed the thing had an almost human-like face, deepening his unease. Then, the creature let out a deep roaring sound, which, oddly, was answered by another guttural sound from yet another creature nearby, one he couldn't see. Not yet. Feeling threatened, Mike raised his shotgun and aimed it off to the side, where he fired a warning shot. However, unlike other average animals, this one, or rather these ones, took this as an immediate threat. Not only did the curious cryptid behind the tree begin charging Mike at full force, but another one made itself known and joined along with it. Woolley didn't waste any time. He turned and ran, with nothing but the earth-shaking footsteps and hungry growls behind him, no different than the spooked doe. Now, Mike Woolley's account is more on par with the Caddo Lake creature, another one of Louisiana's Bigfoot cryptids, but we found the resemblance uncanny. Is it possible that what they call the Honey Island swamp monster is just one of many swamp creatures? But out of all the stories, one of them stands out among the rest that alludes to something terrible happening to the witness. That story about a man named Ted Williams. Ted Williams was actually a resident of Honey Island, living his life as a fisherman and trapper, a true outdoorsman, and someone who knew these swamps like the back of his hand. Rather interestingly, Ted was no more used to these beings than he was just about anything else in that environment. These beasts, these Sasquatches, they were just a part of life in rural Louisiana. He saw them all the time. He quoted, "I'd see them swimming the river and get out of the bank, then disappear into the swamp." Honey Island offered a suitable area for trout fishing, and this is where Williams usually managed to see them. But eerily, Ted Williams provided this account shortly before he'd go missing. He was going out to set out lines for said trout, as he always did, but one day just didn't return. Subsequent searches for the man came up with nothing. No sign of Ted's fate came up. No body, not even the smallest indicator, was found. Ted Williams just went out there one day and disappeared. Had he fallen victim to the elements or wildlife in the swamp? Or did he accidentally cross paths with something else? With Harlan Ford serving as the centerpiece of the swamp monster story, he appeared in the 1970s mystery program In Search Of to share his experience, which brought the most attention to the subject to date. It was unique and seemingly experienced by a proud few, but no one shared as much interest as Harlan did. Between his first encounter in 1963 and his death in 1980, the outdoorsman remained avid on the hunt for answers in Honey Island. But unbeknownst to his family, Harlan Ford was much more dedicated to his research than once thought. Dana Holyfield, Harlan's granddaughter and author of Honey Island swamp monster documentations, received a series of items upon Ford's passing that seemed to suggest he had taken more trips to the swamp than originally thought. She observed letters written by her grandfather, providing first-hand accounts of his experiences, as well as the infamous plaster cast. And one more very interesting piece of evidence: a small roll of 8mm film. Written on a strip of tape on the casing were the words, "Honey Island Swamp Monster." Curious, Dana played the film, and this is what was on it. After examination, it looked as if Harlan started rolling his camera sometime in the 1960s while perched up from a tree. Then, looking out into the tree line, you can just barely make out a large, bipedal creature moving from right to left in the shot. For once, even if just a little, there was now documented piece of media associated with the elusive swamp monster. It's as eerie as it is fascinating. However, footage aside, the biggest question to come out of this is why Harlan Ford simply kept this to himself. He had let the world become familiar with the obscure Honey Island swamp monster, taking multiple trips to the wilderness, searching for any evidence he could find, but this footage, for some reason, remained under lock and key. Until viewed by his granddaughter, it's believed Ford was the only person who viewed it before he died. When the prospect of why was brought up to Dana, she concluded that if he shared it, other curious hunters may pursue the beast and end up getting themselves hurt. After this amazing discovery, the film was analyzed heavily by cryptozoologists, and even though they weren't able to reach a concrete answer, they also couldn't call it a hoax. For the time being, it's up to you to decide its authenticity. Since then, Dana Holyfield has given Harlan's plaster cast to a man named Neil Benson. Benson is also a believer in the swamp monster and works as a tour guide for Pearl River Eco Tours, his own swamp guide company that takes trips around Honey Island. Neil has an extremely close relationship with Louisiana swampland, dating all the way back to his childhood, exploring them alone as early as the age of 10, then owning his first motorized boat at the age of 12. Neil explains that the swamp is home to many secrets, both the kind more suited for police and the kind that may lie beyond the realm of understanding. He'd know. Neil bore witness to the Honey Island swamp monster for the first time at the age of 16. While he was duck hunting in a canoe, Benson watched it wade through the water, no different than a person would, saying it moved, quote, unlike any creature seen on two legs. Also saying, quote, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't like any man I've seen. Coming from a native local to the area, this is a pretty compelling account. For now, Dana Holyfield continues her grandfather's work, collecting data, documentation, and evidence supporting the claim that something is in the swamp, something we may not understand lives out there, and probably has been for quite some time, even if only in the collective consciousness. In 2013, she put together a documentary about the subject called The Legend of the Honey Island Swamp Monster, providing a deep dive about the cryptid and its history. conducting interviews, and collaborating with fellow followers like Neil Benson. Sometimes the concept of Bigfoot brings about a slightly more lighthearted reaction compared to the darker, more convoluted creatures that have gained traction over the years. They've taken on a more commercial title with less of its ancient lore being considered. If anything, the classic Sasquatch has more in the name of proof to it than some of its counterparts, some only seen in one instance or another. Although we can discount the tale of the ill-fated circus train, the consistency of eyewitness descriptions continues to stack on top of each other. 7 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, covered in fur, and occasionally, brightly glowing eyes. Why there? Why in the Honey Island swamp region in particular? Could there really be one or perhaps more carnivorous cryptids lurking behind the trees, stalking curious explorers? And on that note, whatever happened to the witness Ted Williams all those years ago? It's a haunting thought, taking into consideration that most creatures in this category tend to come off more timid and afraid of humans. Whatever lives near Pearl River, though, seems to be the exact opposite. When we think of Dana Holyfield's hypothesis of why Harlan 4 never shared this footage, and some of the stories explored previously, it makes a lot of sense. Because the last thing you would want as a swamp explorer is to worry about something bigger, something stronger than the alligators.